Hey guys, Jacob Salinas here, and I'm here to talk about my Communication 3304 final project. And for my project, I chose option B. And option B is to choose an advertising character and trace their history. Now, for me, I decided to choose two characters that are synonymous with pancakes. The first would be Aunt Jemima, and the second, of course, would be Mrs. Butterworth. Now, like I said, they both represent pancakes. So I figured, why not? Why don't we learn a little bit more about them? Now, for Aunt Jemima is interesting because the character itself is based on a real person. So the first Aunt Jemima is actually modeled to look like the spokesperson, which would be Nancy Green. And like I said, what's interesting about that is the fact that they were looking for a specific person to represent Aunt Jemima, which would be a middle-aged black woman in a red bandana. Now, this is usually what they associated to be the character of Aunt Jemima. So, if you look at some of the early posters that they have, that she's pretty much represented as a former black slave who used to be a really good cook. And this is actually in some of the research I found. One of the posters actually displays that, oh, these pancakes are so good, and then one of the person looks at the hostess and say, "When did you get a new black cook?" So yeah, it's not even subtly. It's really racist. At least the first run of advertisements in the early 1890s to, like, say, the 1920s. And then after that, we kept on getting some new Aunt Jemimas because usually they cast middle-aged women to be Aunt Jemima, so naturally they would die. So that when they would cast a new Aunt Jemima, they would represent the Aunt Jemima character to represent the spokesperson. That way they'd say, okay, this is Aunt Jemima, this is who you're talking to. And we see as history goes on that Aunt Jemima sort of became more modernized. She didn't become necessarily a representation of a former slave that now cooks pancakes. So, as you can see, as the times became more modern and as people weren't really as racist as they were when the company first started, they sort of tiled down the hints of racism and gave us the modern Aunt Jemima that we have right now, which is not extremely racist. You wouldn't look at her and say, okay, you could definitely see that they were trying to make her look like a former slave, because she just looks like a modern-day African-American woman. So with not Aunt Jemima, with Mrs. Butterworth, of course, you always get those two confused, I guess. Mrs. Butterworth is interesting because what makes her stand out is product differentiation. I don't think I said that word correctly, but pretty much what made her stand out was the packaging. She's one of the few, if not only, bottles of syrup in which the bottle herself looks like a woman. It looks like this is what you assume to be Mrs. Butterworth. And she's a older woman, usually looks like an older woman, wearing a apron. So off the bat, she looks like a grandmother. And even during some of the advertisements, the early advertisements she did, she had an old grandmother voice. So they're trying to build that association that if you want your grandmother's pancakes, you would buy Mrs. Butterworth. That representation has not changed over time. Pretty much the same arguments they made back then, which is that Mrs. Butterworth is a thick syrup and it's not healthy, but it tastes good and it must be good for you. And then they tried to build that association with your grandmother's pancakes, which, of course, it